A legend joins Ferrari and discovers a flaw no one dared to speak of. A braking system on the verge of collapse, exposed under the Singapore lights. Telemetry screaming, carbon on fire, and Hamilton whispering, "No brakes, mate." Now inside Maranello, silence speaks louder than any denial. The story of Ferrari's latest flaw did not begin in Singapore. It began 6 months earlier in a sterile wind tunnel bay in Maranello, where ambition and compromise quietly collided. When the SF-25 project first emerged, its mission was clear: to recover the top-end speed deficit that had haunted Ferrari for 2 seasons. Engineers chased aerodynamic purity like an obsession. Every duct, every fin, every surface was sculpted for efficiency. The car's bodywork was tightened around the internals until the side pods looked almost sculptural, a triumph of design philosophy. It was beautiful. It was bold. It was, as Hamilton would later discover, fatally fragile. Inside the design office, the decision to shrink the cooling channels was not reckless, it was rational. In Formula One, airflow is currency. The less drag, the faster the car. To achieve that, Ferrari reduced the volume of air flowing through the brake ducts, relying on new carbon ceramic materials capable of absorbing higher heat. On paper, it was brilliant. On track, it was suicidal. No simulation in Maranello could recreate the unique brutality of Singapore, the stop-start rhythm, the low-speed corners, the endless braking zones. In those conditions, the SF-25's slender, cooling vanes were not elegant, they were suffocating. Lewis Hamilton had sensed it long before the team's sensors did. In pre-season testing, he complained of long pedal travel, the sensation of brakes softening over time. Engineers reassured him that it was part of the car's character, a side effect of tighter packaging and new regenerative settings. But Hamilton's instincts, honed by decades of mechanical awareness, told him something was wrong. "It's not consistency," he said during one debrief. "It's breathing. The system can't breathe." Few in the room took notice. Ferrari had heard similar concerns from other drivers in the past, and they had always found ways to manage. What no one realized was that Hamilton had just described a very flaw that would later humiliate them under the floodlights of Marina Bay. By the time the championship reached Singapore, the team's optimism masked its uncertainty. The SF-25 had shown glimpses of brilliance, dominant at Monza, competitive at Spa, but those circuits hid its weaknesses behind long straights and high-speed airflow. Singapore was different. It punished tight packaging, exposed inefficiency, and rewarded mechanical stability. Ferrari's simulation data predicted elevated brake temperatures, but nothing catastrophic. The engineers believed they could manage it through strategy: early lift and coast, wider brake bias, increased airflow via small vanes added before the race. It was damage control disguised as confidence. But Hamilton, reading the car in real time, felt the danger building with every lap. By lap 20, the first warning arrived. The telemetry showed the front left disc peaking above 1,000 degrees Celsius, a threshold Ferrari's internal documents marked as critical degradation. The team began issuing calm instructions: lift and coast for temps. Reduce bias by 2 clicks forward. Each message brought seconds of relief, but no lasting solution. Inside the cockpit, Hamilton fought the physics of his own machine. He adjusted brake pressures manually, used engine braking to ease the load, even altered his racing line to catch pockets of cooler air. But Singapore's heat is relentless. For every degree he lost, 2 returned. By lap 40, the system was beyond recovery. What stunned Ferrari's pit wall wasn't simply that the brakes failed, it was how quickly Hamilton recognized what they had missed. When he radioed, "Front's argon, mate, it's not cooling," his words echoed through the garage like an accusation. The engineers checked the airflow maps and saw what he meant. The temperature differentials between the internal ducts and ambient air were widening beyond predicted tolerance. It was not just overheating, it was isolation. The front axle was no longer receiving enough airflow to cool the discs at all. The car's very design, the tight underfloor, the narrow side pods, had created a vacuum where cooling should have been. Hamilton, alone in the cockpit, was fighting a design decision made half a year earlier by men who could only watch. By the final laps, the flaw was no longer theoretical. Flames licked from the brake housing as the carbon began to oxidize. Ferrari's cameras caught the faint shimmer of heat distortion escaping from beneath the wheel arches. To the outside world, it looked like wear. To the engineers, it was confession. The SF-25's beauty had betrayed it. In the pursuit of perfection, Ferrari had built a machine too elegant for reality, one that prioritized speed over survival. When Hamilton crossed the line, the data log was clear: brake temperature failure, pressure collapse, full thermal runaway. A mechanical truth hidden by design had been exposed by instinct. After the race, the debrief room in Maranello was silent. The engineers reviewed the footage in disbelief, frame by frame, their once proud creation glowing red on the replay. The chief aerodynamicist spoke first, almost whispering. "We took too much from the front," he said. "We've stolen air from ourselves." Fred Vasseur listened without interruption. He knew they could not undo what had happened. The design philosophy that had brought Ferrari back to contention had now become its weakness. And the driver they had hired to restore glory had just revealed the price of that pursuit. In Maranello, the Monday after Singapore did not begin with the usual rhythm of recovery. There was no laughter in the corridors, no casual conversation over espresso. The mood was surgical, restrained, uneasy. What had happened under the lights of Marina Bay was more than a mechanical failure. It was a revelation, one that reached the heart of Ferrari's technical identity. Inside the team's engineering headquarters, the SF-25's data was already being downloaded, parsed, and examined with a kind of forensic obsession. Every lap, every brake trace, every degree of temperature was laid bare. And with each graph, a picture began to emerge, one that even the most loyal engineer could no longer defend. The evidence was as brutal as it was undeniable. The front left brake assembly had reached temperatures of 1,086 degrees Celsius, far beyond the material's endurance limit. The carbon surface had started to delaminate, shedding layers of composite into the airflow. The telemetry confirmed the progressive collapse of pressure in the hydraulic system, a slow death of efficiency that no amount of driver skill could reverse. In a sport obsessed with precision, this was a mechanical confession. The SF-25 had failed not because of bad luck, but because of design. At the center of the post-race analysis was a single screen in Ferrari's race operations room. On it, two curves glowed side by side, Hamilton's brake temperature trace and Leclerc's. Both showed the same pattern, a slow, relentless rise in temperature that plateaued far too late. "It's systemic," one engineer murmured, "not driver-specific." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around the room, no one argued. The silence wasn't agreement, it was resignation. They all knew what that meant. The flaw was not in the execution, it was in the concept itself. Fred Vasseur, methodical and unflappable, entered the room an hour later. His presence was quiet, but his expression was sharp. "Show me where we lost it," he said simply. The engineers began their presentation: airflow diagrams, CFD heat maps, comparative pressure zones. The conclusion was clear within minutes. The SF-25's brake ducts had been designed too narrowly, their internal channels starved of airflow by the car's new underfloor geometry. The very shapes that made the Ferrari fast on the straights, the sculpted side pods, the low-slung chassis, had created aerodynamic interference around the brake inlets. At high speed, it was manageable. At low speed, like Singapore, it was catastrophic. The ducts were not breathing, they were suffocating. Vasseur listened in silence. Around him, the senior engineers spoke with the calm of men dissecting a failure they already understood too well. "We built a car for wind, not for heat," one aerodynamicist admitted. Another added, "The system performs beautifully in the tunnel, but the tunnel doesn't simulate the traffic, the dirt, the brake dust. We made a car that only works in perfection." It was the most painful truth a Formula One team could face, that their creation was magnificent only in theory. Behind the technical language, however, tension was brewing. The chassis department blamed the aerodynamicists for over-prioritizing drag efficiency. The Aero group countered that the cooling specifications had been approved by the mechanical division. The argument was polite but charged. In Maranello, politics has always moved like a shadow, invisible but always present. Vasseur let the debate run just long enough before ending it with a quiet but devastating phrase: "We are one team." One mistake. The words were not accusation, they were sentence. By midweek, Ferrari had launched a secretive internal project known only as _Operazione Delta_. Its goal was simple: redesign the brake duct system without altering the car's homologated chassis. The challenge was monumental. Any new duct would have to fit within the existing aerodynamic package, meaning that cooling improvements risked destabilizing the car's airflow balance. The engineers worked in shifts around the clock, simulating dozens of variants. Some proposed expanding the inlets and compensating with minor drag penalties. Others wanted to modify the internal airflow with microfins and diverter vanes. Every idea carried risk. Every change required compromise. Meanwhile, the political layer of the team began its own dance. Ferrari's senior management in Maranello demanded answers, not in technical jargon, but in reassurance. "Can it happen again?" they asked. The engineers' replies were careful. "Not to the same degree," one said, choosing each word like a surgeon. "But the root cause is inherent." It was as close as anyone dared come to admitting that the SF-25's flaw was structural. To redesign it would mean rewriting the car's DNA, and Ferrari was already building next year's chassis. Hamilton's role in all of this was both accidental and instrumental. His feedback had been the spark that ignited the investigation, but his name also became a shield. Ferrari could frame the problem as a matter of driver adaptation, a narrative that soothed investors and sponsors. But inside the garage, no one was fooled. They knew Hamilton had been right from the beginning. He hadn't exposed Ferrari's weakness out of arrogance. He had revealed it through feel. "He's like a sensor with a heartbeat," one engineer said admiringly. He felt what the data took days to confirm. In private, Hamilton's debriefs were brutally honest. "It's not the car's pace," he told Vasseur. "It's the way it breathes. It traps its own heat. You're asking it to run a marathon with a blocked nose." The metaphor was vivid and precise, a perfect summary of the SF-25 sickness. The engineers nodded, taking notes they would later translate into complex airflow equations. But the message was simple. Ferrari's masterpiece was overheating on the inside, both literally and metaphorically. In the end, the post-race investigation produced a detailed, classified report, 46 pages of graphs, temperature charts, and proposed modifications. The cover sheet bore a single phrase, underscore, root cause identified, aerodynamic induced thermal saturation. Underscore, it was the kind of conclusion that looked scientific but sounded almost poetic, a confession dressed as analysis. Ferrari had found its flaw, but fixing it would take months. In the meantime, Hamilton would have to live with it, and the team would have to live with the fear that, at any moment, the problem could return. Every Formula One driver speaks a language that only his race engineer truly understands. For Lewis Hamilton, that language has always been calm precision, short phrases, measured tone, emotion translated into data. But in Singapore, that composure cracked. The moment came not with a crash, not with smoke, but with a sound. His voice on the radio, edged with disbelief. "No brakes, mate. They're gone." Inside the Ferrari garage, those words froze time. On the pit wall, Riccardo Adami, Hamilton's new race engineer, glanced at his telemetry screen and saw the numbers in red. Brake pressure collapsing. Disk temperature surging beyond 1,000 degrees. Front left airflow velocity below half its target value. To the untrained eye, it was just data. To Adami, it was a scream. He pressed the radio button, his voice deliberately steady. "Copy, Lewis. Lift and coast for brakes. We need to cool the fronts." The world heard only calm. But behind that calm was panic, the kind that comes when a system you believe in starts to die before your eyes. From the cockpit camera, the reality was visceral. Hamilton's foot pressed the brake pedal, nothing. The travel was long, soft, unresponsive. The Ferrari steering wheel lights flickered as the front axle lost grip under braking, the car diving nose first into turn 14 with a violence that even his skill couldn't disguise. "They're fading everywhere," he said next, voice strained but focused. Adami responded again, careful to keep control of the tone. "Understood, Lewis. Engine braking mode 5, use more rear bias." Hamilton adjusted instantly, his hands steady, his mind running faster than the car. But it wasn't working. Every corner was becoming an act of faith. The onboard microphones picked up the small, rhythmic tapping of his right foot, a desperate technique drivers use to pump hydraulic pressure back into a failing system. The sound, amplified through the broadcast, became eerie. In those moments, Hamilton wasn't racing. He was negotiating with physics. The pedal sank, pressure dropped, and his instincts took over. He braked earlier, used the gearbox to slow the car, and improvised with the precision of a fighter pilot managing a damaged aircraft. "Pedals long again," he reported. "Fronts are cooked. I'm driving on vapor." Ferrari's pit wall tried to stay composed, but the atmosphere was changing by the second. Engineers exchanged glances, eyes flicking between screens and one another. The telemetry confirmed what Hamilton had already said. Front brake temperatures were climbing beyond any safety margin. The brake-by-wire system was now compensating automatically, shifting balance to the rear and reducing regenerative power from the front motor. But even that artificial control couldn't contain the physics. The car was overheating from within. Then came the spark, literal and symbolic. On lap 56, as Hamilton exited turn 7, sparks erupted from the left front corner. The world saw what Ferrari already feared. The carbon was oxidizing, the material itself breaking down from heat. Hamilton's voice returned, quieter now. "I've got nothing left, mate. The pedal's gone." Adami's reply came after a pause that felt eternal. "Understood, Lewis. Bring it home. Just bring it home." Those words, calm, clinical, carried the weight of a team watching its masterpiece disintegrate. Back at Maranello, the live telemetry feed from the circuit streamed directly into the operations room. Engineers watching from thousands of kilometers away saw the numbers flash crimson. Brake temperatures peaking at 1,070 degrees. Cooling airflow reduced by 42%. Pressure collapse recorded at 2 bars. They couldn't intervene, they could only watch. One young analyst later admitted, it was like listening to a heartbeat stop.